everybody. I hope your weekend is going well. So I'm back to talk about this film called Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni Project. Okay, if you're watching this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, um, and thank you to all of you who have already done that. So this project, I actually originally saw it at the Lincoln Center Film Festival back in the fall. I took my elective class, the teaching elective called Still I Rise, Black Activism in the 20th and 21st Century, to show the resistance against oppression throughout the 20th, 21st centuries, despite the oppression that does exist, because I don't believe in black joy to the point of pretending like oppression ain't there. But anyway, and it's about Nikki Giovanni, the great poet Nikki Giovanni. So it starts out with a quote from her that says, "The trip to Mars is something that only Black Americans can understand." And I am a huge fan of Afrofuturism. I love Octavia Butler, the godmother of Afrofuturism. Black people writing themselves into the future. And I think that is a form of resistance. And she says that space is a great place in this documentary for Black women. Who else could go into space? Black women can make themselves at home anywhere. It's just we're in other places here on Earth. Black women can go to Mars. I love it. Anyway, but the documentary is about her life, and it weaves in a lot of different events from her life, and it's really good. I really recommend this. And I'm somebody, I will go in on historical movies and things like that are long, but when I see something good, I love it. So we get her talking about herself in her older years or whatever. And one of the things that they start the documentary with, and because it's about her life, her as a person, she says she doesn't remember a lot of things. But a lot of things she does not remember. She does not choose to remember them. She said, "I remember what's important, and I make up the rest." And she goes on to say that she chooses not to remember things that don't make her happy. And somebody asked her at a talk in this documentary, they go, "Where were you April 4th, 1968, when Dr. King passed?" And they were like, "Well, how did that day affect you?" She said, "I don't know. I don't remember." She said, "I'm sure it's a good question, but I can't answer it. I don't remember." And she I think something in my heart realized how painful that must be, but also how necessary sometimes it is to not always have to relive your trauma to please somebody else needing an answer or a response. Hang
So yeah, she's saying that because I think it's just necessary. But I think the way she thinks, the way she approaches things is just so mind blowing. So I really suggest y'all watch it. So I love and admire Nikki Giovanni and her work. And I say this as a person who doesn't, I don't really like poetry. I actually don't like poetry really at all. There are some exceptions for the most part. And I do mean like three main exceptions. There are people that can get my interest, like Nikki Giovanni, Langston Hughes, Gwendolyn Brooks. I prefer Audre Lorde's essays to her poetry any day. But Nikki Giovanni is beyond her trade and talent as a poet. She encourages. She's a fighter. She critiques and fights racism, sexism, classism, supports the rights of people. I mean, she's a tour de force. You got to give it to her. And I learned about Nikki Giovanni, or the way Nikki Giovanni was actually introduced to me, um, was her poetry through the poem "Ego Tripping," when it was on a different world. The short version. I remember asking my mother after Kim was like, "Oh, by Nikki Giovanni, who is that?" My mother was like, "You don't know this," Um, and because I learned about Nikki Giovanni because of my age, after Nikki Giovanni was a well-established poet, there were things I learned from this documentary and things I began to dig up even back to 2020 about who Nikki Giovanni was and all that she had done, and realized how little I didn't know about her. So when this documentary came out in the fall, I took my students. I was able to get, the school to pay for the field trip or whatever. So in 2020, we were all locked down. Okay. In New York City, we were locked down. Okay. All right. Because of COVID-19, we had to follow the rules. Okay. Because Governor Andrew Cuomo wasn't playing. All right. But anyway, the Schomburg, and I'm going to get on my experience with the new Langston Hughes exhibit, which was actually good. But Latina Karen, who tried to tell me that I couldn't take pictures, and I said it has no flash, and I pointed to the sign on the wall today, and I said it says no flash photography, and she was like, "Oh." I was like, "You even work here? Who are you?" Anyway, okay, but the exhibit's cute. If you live in New York, go to Schomburg. If you visit, go. Anyway, now, the Schomburg was streaming this movie because, like I said, we couldn't go anywhere. Called Mr. Soul. I watched it. It was about a man named Ellis Hazlett. Mind you, this Mr. Soul documentary is actually on Max too. He was an African-American gay man. He did a lot of activist work. He, like I said, like James Baldwin, was an openly gay black man in the late 1960s and 1970s before it was safe to even admit it. Okay? Live it. Let alone exist so freely. Okay? Anyway, PBS, which was a government-funded channel, to help a lot of racial minority groups because they obviously are typically marginalized, particularly African Americans, educationally, socioeconomically, and to give low-income groups access to educational programming as part of the funding from Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society program, which was to help put money back into underfunded parts of society as a result of all the black people who were giving their lives for things that should have been ours at birth. And not because he just felt so generous. Anyway, and one of the shows for New York's public broadcasting channel, their local show was called Soul! Okay? Now, as I watched the documentary, I remember being so enamored. This is the Soul documentary. But I'm getting to how Nikki Giovanni is in it because Nikki Giovanni also hosted a lot of the episodes for Ellis Hazlett with a lot of different things. And I remember being so enamored with this show, how well done the black programming was. It was rooted in history, black arts, poetry. Like I said, Nikki Giovanni hosted it. She was talking to people like Muhammad Ali, Miriam Makeba, after she got exiled from South Africa, Stokely Carmichael. They had Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, okay, back when that was the case. Anna Marie Horsford from Friday and Amen. All the things we've seen her in, she started on there. They had Al Green performing. I mean, it was just like, and this would all like be in like one show. It was fire. Anyway, and that's where we get the foundational interview conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. And you can find it on YouTube, but the Soul program, like not the Soul, S-O-L-E, Soul, S-O-U-L, the name of the program. I bought it on Amazon. I bought the first season. That was the only one they had, just to have it because I was so afraid it would disappear. I couldn't even believe it was on TV because we all know that things of black quality always get snatched off TV, and it was not unique to the 70s. Anyway, so Nikki Giovanni did this poetry thing with the gospel choir. I mean, like, the stuff was so brilliant and creative, and the fact that it was allowed to just flow was amazing. And because they're showing these clips of it in a documentary. Because, she always talked about how she digged the black church, despite, any problems other people had with it. She said, when she looks back on the episode with James Baldwin, not James Baldwin, with the gospel choir, when she's reading her poetry, like ego tripping with a gospel choir, she said that was spoken word before they called it that. She said they give Grammys for that now. She was like, I need to call somebody because they owe me a Grammy. I love it. But that conversation she had with James Baldwin in 2 parts, it was on 2 episodes, and they talked for a long time about James Baldwin was making an argument about black men being angry and leaving the family or taking out on black women when they get home because their life is so hard. They don't get any respect in the street. It was important and it was deep. But Nikki Giovanni was challenging him every step of the way, and I thought it was appropriate. Because I'm somebody who loved James Baldwin and everything, and love his writings and his articulation of racism. But he failed to understand what was going on with black women, and that was kind of clear with the shift. in that interview. Because even sometimes when I watch it, I kind of feel like, dang, James Baldwin, with the sweetheart stuff. Like, it wasn't, I don't know, I just felt like she was dropping too much knowledge even for James Baldwin. He couldn't handle it. But nevertheless, it's a good conversation. But Baldwin did what became the go-to then, and that we're still dealing with the effects of, the protect the black man at all cost, because the white world treats black men so bad. Granted, I'm not arguing with that. I don't think most black women argue with that. I think it has become an issue in recent years, like the last decade, because black men often deny black women's experiences with white supremacy. Why didn't y'all just be quiet? Why didn't y'all just do this? And black women are not known for denying black men's issues like that. Certainly not with police brutality and violence. And it's heaped upon black women because then it becomes internal within relationships, the intimate partner violence that we're asked to say nothing about to protect the black community, but black men can trash us. So, like, and it wasn't always popular to have the opinions that Nikki Giovanni had. But she didn't care. All right. So, anyway, he's making a point that he attempted to even talk about his father. And anybody who knows anything about James Baldwin, his father was very abusive to him, his mother, his family. And he's saying things in a conversation with Nikki Giovanni. Look, I didn't understand him then, but I understand him now. And he was under so much pressure and couldn't get respect anywhere as a black man, except for in the church and in his family, by making people respect him. And Nikki Giovanni was like, no. She said, at some point, if we're going to fix the issues in our community, somebody's got to fake it. She was like, women asking for love and affection should not be traded because you have to pay the rent. And black women work. And she even used the example of her mother, right? Her mother was a school teacher. She was like, the rent will get paid, and it will. Somehow, some way, things work out. She was like, you fake it with that white man you work for. You fake it with people in the street. And here, as a black woman, I come home. I love you, and it's me you take it out on. You can fake with everybody else, but you can't fake with the person that loves you. And that she was like, and that's what children learn. And then the cycle repeats. And I was like, yes, Nikki. Thank you for saying that before it was popular and when it was unpopular, and for being tough enough to have that conversation. But that's what made it good, because I know people think like James Baldwin was about a generation ahead of her in terms of his age. And Nikki was younger. And I think the fact that they were able to sit there and have that conversation was so healthy, and it's so good that we can actually still go back and look at it. But by the end of the conversation, she points out to James Baldwin, she said, yes, my mother works hard and she loves Gus, talking about her father. She says, but he beats her. And it almost takes the air out of James Baldwin. And he has to stop. And I don't know if it was the clarity, the transparency, because they were talking kind of all around the abuse. And it's not like you don't know that that's what they were talking about, but they didn't use it. They weren't saying the word, right? And when she said it, it was almost like whatever was in him that may have been stuffed down somewhere, he couldn't come up with words. And I can't remember how much that they play as I go through the documentary and how much I remember from the actual interview. But anyway, they do use the interview in the documentary. Anyway, I'll leave that there. So she describes her childhood. She was born in Tennessee. She goes to Ohio about 2 months after she's born. But she's a Fisk graduate, Fisk University, where Nikki Giovanni graduated, John Lewis graduated, the great W.B. Du Bois graduated, the great John Hope Franklin graduated. Shout out to my HBCU fam. All right, so anyway, she grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. Like I said, her mother was a teacher. Her father worked a desk job. And jobs they couldn't have gotten in Tennessee. And one of the things she brings up in this documentary, where she talks about that her parents' relationship was stormy. And she says, if there's anything we know, it's that deprivation gives us stormy relationships. And there's so many things in this documentary that even watching it twice, I sit there and I go, whew. There's so much there to think about, because what we're deprived of, we're always kind of looking for and angry when somebody we want to give it to us can't or doesn't. Who is playing out there in the hallway? Anyway, and she talks about her parents and the abuse, and she says the way she survived as a kid, with her sister. She said was to have an imagination, and I imagine that's not what you're trying to do as a kid, is use your imagination, but imagination is how you cope. And yeah, I get it. I get it. I don't know how to articulate it, but I get it. And she talks about how her father, she talks about her father as cruel. And she said, even her older age, she's trying to understand it, but he's cruel. He's passed away now. And even she says, because they have her doing all these different radio talks and her talks and discussions. And she goes, I'm telling you right now, my father treated my mother bad. She was like, that's how I know I'm going to hell. Because me and Gus got some stuff to discuss. I said, all right, well, go off, Nikki, go off. She ain't letting this go, and I ain't mad at her. So her mother said, well, Nikki said that she thinks her mother was looking for some form of protection from a man, despite the fact that he abused her. And I think that's true for many women. And I think part of the process of abuse is also men trying to convince you nobody's going to love you or protect you like me, even if they're abusing you. And you can say, oh, that sounds crazy. Well, if you've been in it long enough, and somebody who you fell in love with wasn't like that when you fell in love with them, or you didn't know they were like that, you can mind fuck yourself into that. And they can do it for you. So be careful before you judge. Anyway, she says she remembers her father smacking her mother so hard that she flew across the room like a rag doll and begged him not to hit her again. She was like, but he did. She said she was told what happens in this house stays in his house. And that is often, I understand family business, but it's usually those extreme circumstances that people are covering up when they use that. And it becomes toxic and painful. Now, she said it was shortly after that particular incident that she went to live with her grandmother, because it became clear, and I can't remember how old she was. She said that either I was going to kill him or I had to move. And so I had to go live with my grandmother. And I was like, whew, that's hard. So she wrote a poem called Nikki Via Rosa. And so there, she's reading it or whatever, where she talks about her childhood remembrances. And the man who's like the producer said, well, what was it like as a child to wake up at 11 on Saturday night? Because she mentions it in the poem, but she doesn't go into it in detail, because the reference is to her father who abused her mother. And she said to the producer who asked her that question, she said, you are clearly asking a question that I will never give you or anybody else the answer to, because you're asking me to go someplace I don't want to go because it makes me unhappy. And I refuse to be unhappy about something I can do nothing about. I said, you know what, Nikki? Get people together. I stay learning from this documentary, okay? This is the second time I'm taking a look at it. So they show excerpts of so many talks and speeches that she gives, like I said. And what I love is that she often never goes in the direction that you think she will in regards to a topic. So, for example, she was giving a talk to some young kids in Philadelphia. And she was like, I like Christmas, okay. Talk about the holidays. She said, but I hate Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. She was like, don't you? And I was to myself, no. Like, I love Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Because I thought she was going to say she hates it because they play it, the song all the time and the movie all the time. But instead, she said, no, I hated it because she wanted to know what was wrong with everybody with the story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And I was like, what is she talking about? And she goes, all the other reindeers laughed and called him names. She was like, what the hell was that? She said, where was Santa and Mrs. Claus? They knew what was going on. They should have come out and corrected that. I said, okay. She said, but the minute they needed something, they wanted to come and ask Rudolph for it after they didn't protect him. She said, Rudolph should have cursed them out. I said, go off, Nikki. Come on, Nikki. I ain't never thought about it that way, but you changed my mind. And she was like, anybody in this room, she was talking to a group of kids who has talent, needs to come. I'm telling you this, from sucking up under those dumbass reindeer who are talking about you. Because anybody who has any talent in the room, you're lonely. And you have to go on with your life. And at some point in your life, you'll find someone who is as lonely as you are, and you build community from there. And I hope that's true. Not that I don't doubt the part about talent making you lonely. I do wonder about the fact that you could ever find community in that loneliness. But she makes you think. Makes you think it's powerful. Um, and then they get her talking another time, and I'm just doing some of the highlights. But she said, "You gotta love those people who, no matter what, say I'm gonna smile. I'm just gonna keep going." And she said, you have black people who look back on other black people who are smiling all the time and say, "Oh, they didn't know what they were doing," and putting them down or whatever. She was like, they knew they had to stay sane. Like, they knew they had to keep it together. And she was like, I love black people. I think we're wonderful people. And I think it's time we realize that. And she said it with tears welling up in her eyes. And I don't know that a lot of us, but I think there's a good amount of us as black people who love who we are, appreciate who we are, and the white supremacist resistance, not only from white people themselves, but the people who feel very comfortable helping to carry out white supremacy to black people, who will refer to themselves as people of color and then act as white people because their position depends on how badly they treat other black people or treat black people. It's frustrating to you. And to live as long as she has into her 70s, I mean, still young, but long as she has into her 70s, and still have to see these waves of just forms of oppression that keep us from even just living, physically living. It's got to be a lot. It's got to be a lot. She doesn't say that. It's got to be a lot. And she said, look, I educated my son, I paid for my house, I own my car, and I can live as I fucking well please. I said, I love it. I want to be like you, Nikki. I want to be like you. So we see her with her wife in their home. She said she never wanted to get married or become like her mother. And I think in the sense that, like, she saw that relationship is something she never wanted to repeat. She said when she had her son, the guy that she had with wanted to get married, and she said, I didn't want that. She said, I wanted to be a poet, and I didn't want to live that life. She was like, and I was, a single mother, and everywhere I went, as a poet, my son is essentially was a nomad those first few years before he went to school, because everywhere I went, I just took him, So they're showing her, in her essence from poetry, but also in her daily life, she deals with seizures and lung cancer. And she had breast cancer. She survived it. But she said they offered her chemo for breast cancer. And she said, I'm 74 at the time. And she said, I looked at them and I said, well, just take the titty. She said, well, I don't need to do any chemotherapy. I'm 74. She said, this titty has done all it's going to do. I don't have to breastfeed. I don't need no... I'm not trying to impress no man. Just take it. I don't know why, but I holla. Yes, I do know why. But for something that is always so personal for me, to have somebody be able to deal with it like that just took me to a happy place. So she goes through moments in her life, like her first book, Black Judgment is Coming. And she said it was a great book, and that she still didn't know after moving to New York how, though, she was going to publish her first set of poetry, because it was a book of poetry. She said nobody was going to publish this. So she said she called her grandmother and a few other people, and they gave her a loan to help her get it self-published. And then she sold it on the streets. Like, she was just going around with her card selling on the streets. And she was like, there were plenty of black bookstores, and they had particularly the National African Memorial Bookstore, but Louis Michaud owned it for years. I mean, he always owned it. But she was just like, those kinds of they showed it in the documentary. But she was like, those kind of bookstores really is what helped keep her going. The fact that she knew there was some knowledge, some desire for this knowledge and this thirst for knowledge. So by the time you get to the end of the documentary, Nikki Giovanni, as far as I'm concerned, is a national living, breathing treasure. Okay, a world treasure. Do you hear me? Okay, it is a blessing to have people like this who have written for generations to come, okay? Including, myself and the ones that are here now. And I try to encourage people to appreciate these people while they are here. And for some reason, my experience with black people that I've been close to or just known of, it's almost like they have, like they know they may not have the date, but they can tell when their time is near. And I feel like that's why Nikki did a documentary so intimate. Her relationship with her son is never fully explained. She raised him. She said she gave him the choice to go to college, but he was lethargic. And she explained, look, it's either, because he didn't want to go to college, it's either the military or you got to get the fuck up out my house. So he went to the military. She was like, because he had to grow up. And it's not really explained, but they were estranged for a long time because the first time she had really seen her granddaughter, was it 15? I can't remember if it was the first time she had seen her or since she was like a small kid, like a very small kid. Because the granddaughter hadn't really met her, like, to where she could remember. And she meets him with the son and the wife at one of her book publishing events. And her name is Kai. And her granddaughter sits down at the end of the documentary and she's watching the interview with Nikki Giovanni, who's her grandmother, and James Baldwin. And she said, wow, you are so strong. I don't think I could have done that. And she just says kind of gently, you'll get there. And it is just very loving. I loved it. And it ends, though, with Nikki Giovanni giving a talk. And she's 76 at the time she's giving this. And says when she's 80, she said she wants to give herself a few years. She said she's going to go up and she's going to sit on the space station in Mars, I guess on Mars, for a couple of years. She said, because we don't have any artists or poets in space. She said, so I'm going to go there and I'm going to tell him everything I've seen basically in my time. And then she says, I'll do what everybody else does. I'll die. She said, so once I, tell them what I need to tell them, and I've hit 80, she said, all I want them to do at the space station is just open the door, because they have one of those doors, and just let me out. And they'll let me out, and you'll look up in the sky and say, there goes Nikki. I said, this is the best. But there are so many gems in it. I really encourage y'all to take a look at it along with this review, and trust me, it's worth it. And comment on it, once you watch it or go watch it. Happy Black History Month. See y'all soon. Bye.